I know exactly how this story sounds. A man overhears a woman betting everyone at the office that he doesn't have the nerve to ask her out. And then, instead of walking away with whatever's left of his dignity, he asks her out anyway. People hear that and they picture some kind of revenge move, some calculated act designed to prove a point. I need you to understand, before I say anything else, that this was never about winning. It was never about the bet. It was about the fact that by the time I heard her say those words, I had already bought the restaurant reservation. I had already practiced what I was going to say. I had already decided 3 weeks earlier, standing in the rain outside a coffee shop with a cup that had her order written on it, because I'd memorized it by accident, that I was done pretending I wasn't completely in love with her. Her name was Nora Quinn. She worked in product design 2 floors above me. And on a Tuesday afternoon in late October, I was standing just outside the break room door when I heard her laugh and say, "$5 says he never does it. Honestly, 20. I'll put 20 on it." The voice that answered belonged to Marcus from her team. "You're that sure?" And Nora, without a single moment of hesitation, said, "I'm that sure." Let me take you back to where this actually started. Because if I'm going to tell this the right way, you need to understand what she was to me before I ever had the courage to do anything about it. You need to understand that this wasn't a story about being brave. It was a story about being so certain of something that even a $20 bet couldn't shake it loose. I started at Callaway and Reed 14 months before that Tuesday. I was 31, freshly relocated from Chicago, and deeply committed to the idea of keeping my head down and doing the work without getting tangled in office politics or anything resembling personal drama. I had my desk on the 3rd floor. I had my headphones. I had my routine. Coffee at 8:15, lunch at my desk more often than not, leave by 6:30. I was not looking for anything. I was not even looking for friends. I was in that particular kind of lonely that happens when you've moved cities and started over and haven't quite decided whether you made a good decision or a terrible one. The kind of lonely that you can manage pretty well as long as nothing surprises you. Nora Quinn walked into my orbit on a Wednesday morning in September because our company was reorganizing the internal process for cross-department project review, which is an extremely dull way to say her team now had to attend the same bi-weekly meetings as mine. She walked in with her laptop bag sliding off one shoulder and a coffee in each hand. One for herself, one she placed in front of someone I'd never seen before, without being asked, without saying anything. Just put it down and sat. That small thing. That quiet, effortless thing. I noticed it more than I should have. She was the kind of person who listened in meetings the way most people don't bother to anymore. She took actual notes. Not on her laptop. In a small paper notebook with a blue cover. When someone made a point she agreed with, she'd nod once, slowly, and write something down. When someone was wrong, she'd wait until they finished and then say, very calmly, "I think there might be a problem with that approach." Not, "I disagree." Not, "actually." Just a gentle, clear, impossible to argue with sentence that somehow made the other person feel like they'd figured it out themselves. I watched this happen 3 times over 2 months and fell a little more each time. The 3rd time it happened, I went back to my desk and sat down and thought, this is a problem. We talked for the first time in November. It was the kind of conversation that happens between 2 people who have been aware of each other for a while and are finally close enough in physical space to pretend it's accidental. She was standing in front of the 3rd floor printer, which, as anyone who has worked at Callaway and Reed can confirm, never works correctly on the first try. I came to print something. The printer gave her an error message. I said, "Try turning it off and back on. It hates being told what to do." She looked at me. "I'm pretty sure that's true of everyone here." And then she smiled. Not a polite smile, a real one. The kind where you can tell someone found it genuinely funny instead of just being nice about it. I walked back to my desk and sat there for a moment before I could focus on anything else. Her name was on her badge. I already knew her name. I'd learned it 6 weeks earlier when I'd heard someone call across the office, and I'd noted it the way you note something that feels important even though you don't know why yet. Nora Quinn, product design, 5th floor. Coffee with oat milk and no sugar. Blue notebook. never checks her phone during meetings. I want to be honest with you about something. I am not someone who falls quickly. I'm not the person at the party who locks eyes with a stranger across the room and feels the ground shift. That has never happened to me. What happens to me is slower, quieter. It's 37 small observations that accumulate over weeks until one morning I'm standing in front of a printer and I realize I know her coffee order without ever having been told it, and the word love is sitting in my chest like it's been there for months, just waiting for me to notice. If you've ever felt that, the slow, certain kind of caring for someone that arrives before you've had the chance to decide, then you already know there's no talking yourself out of it. You just have to decide what to do with it. December came. We started talking more, as people do when they've established that conversation is safe. Comments before meetings, small jokes in the shared kitchen. One afternoon she came to my floor to drop off some project files and stayed for 40 minutes because I was in the middle of explaining something about the data dashboard to my teammate Evan, and she had an idea about the visualization, and she just joined. Like it was the most natural thing. Like the conversation had always had a space for her in it. When she finally left, Evan looked at me with an expression I chose not to engage with, and I went back to work and thought about her the rest of the afternoon. There was an evening in December when a small group of us ended up at the bar 2 blocks from the office. The kind of thing that happens when someone suggests it casually on a Friday and nobody has a good reason to say no. I sat across from Nora at the long wooden table and we talked about things that had nothing to do with work. A book she was rereading for the 3rd time. A neighborhood in the city she had discovered by getting lost, a very specific opinion she had about the way certain buildings deserved better lighting at night. She talked about things like they mattered, like every subject was worth the full attention she brought to it, and I thought, I could listen to her talk about anything. I have listened to a lot of people talk, and I have never thought that before. By January I knew I wanted to ask her out. I also knew I wasn't going to do it yet. Not because I was afraid, exactly. Because I wanted to do it right. I didn't want to fumble it in a hallway or send some message she could read ambiguously and file away and never respond to. I wanted there to be a moment, a real one, where she would know I wasn't being casual or impulsive, where she would understand this wasn't a passing thought. That sounds like a lot of thought to put into asking someone to dinner. I know. I am aware of how this reads. But here's the thing about Nora Quinn. I had been watching her navigate the world for 5 months by that point, and one thing had become very clear. She was paying attention to everything. Every small choice, every gesture, every word. She noticed things the way I noticed things, and I did not want to offer her something careless. So I made a plan, which is where this story starts to get a little absurd. February 14th fell on a Friday that year. I decided I would ask her on the 13th. Not Valentine's Day, that felt too pressured, too much of a statement she might not want to receive. The 13th was just a Thursday, an ordinary day, which was exactly my intention. I didn't want it to feel like a performance. I wanted it to feel like a choice. I found a restaurant called Aldine. Not the flashiest place in the city, but quiet, with good light and a menu that didn't require you to Google half the ingredients. I made a reservation for 2. I thought about what I was going to say, not a speech, just something honest and clear. Something that didn't sound like I'd rehearsed it, even though I had. Something like, I know this might be a strange thing to hear on a random Thursday, but I think you're extraordinary, and I'd like to take you to dinner. 17 words after the opener. I had counted. I had written them down, read them again the next morning, changed one word, counted again, put the paper away. I had the reservation. I had the words. I had selected a Thursday. I had been waiting for the right moment to find her alone, without the overhead noise of a meeting or the distraction of a crowd. And then it was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was walking to the break room for coffee. And through the half-open door I heard my name, not the name my parents gave me. My last name. The one people use when they're talking about someone who isn't in the room. Calloway and Reed's most invisible man, Marcus said, and they both laughed. And then Nora said, he's not invisible, he's just careful. A pause. Do you think he'll ever actually do it? And Nora said, no, I really don't. Another pause. Lighter now. Amused. $20 says he never asks me out. I stood in the hallway with my empty coffee cup and did not move for approximately 7 seconds. The thing about a moment like that is that you have a choice. You can let it change everything. Let the sting of it reroute you, make you smaller, make you retreat to your desk and close your headphones around your ears and decide that the version of yourself who made a reservation and practiced 17 words was naive. Or you can stand there in the hallway and let it pass through you like weather. Let yourself feel it, and believe me, I felt it. And then ask yourself the only question that actually matters. Does this change anything that's true? I stood there until I had my answer. It didn't. Not because I'm the kind of person who doesn't care what other people think. I do care. I'm extremely human in that way. But here's what I understood, standing in that hallway. Nora hadn't said she didn't want me to ask her out. She'd said she didn't think I would. There's a distance between those two things wide enough to drive through. And the $20, the bet, the easy laughter, all of it told me something I hadn't been sure of before that moment. She had thought about it. She was thinking about it enough to make it a joke with her coworker. People don't bet on outcomes that mean nothing to them. I went to my desk, I opened my laptop, I looked at the reservation confirmation sitting in my inbox, the little email from Aldine with the date and the time and the table number, and I felt something clarify inside me. Not bravado, not revenge, just clarity. I was still going to ask her. I had always been going to ask her, and now I had the added information that she had, at some point, wondered if I would. That was enough. More than enough, actually. Wednesday came and went. Thursday arrived. I knew she usually went to the 5th floor terrace at around 4:30 when the weather allowed, not every day but on Thursdays when the sun angled in from the west and made the whole city look like it was made of gold. I knew this because I am a person who pays attention. I went up at 4:22, my heart was doing something inconvenient and I chose to ignore it. She was already there, standing at the railing with her blue notebook under her arm and a half-finished coffee in her hand. She looked out at the skyline the way she always looked at things, like she was actually seeing them, not just glancing in their direction. She heard me come through the door and turned. A small surprised lift of her eyebrows. Hey, the word for when someone you weren't expecting shows up but you're not unhappy about it. Hey, I said. There was a beat of comfortable silence. I had learned over 14 months that Nora was comfortable with silence in a way that most people aren't. She didn't try to fill it. I'd come to understand that this was one of the things I loved most about her. I came to stand next to her at the railing. The city spread out below us, all glass and gray stone and late afternoon light. I was thinking about 17 words. I was thinking about the reservation at Aldine. I was thinking about standing in that hallway and making a choice. And then I thought about all of it, the months of small mornings and quiet jokes and her writing in that blue notebook, and the way she had looked at me the first time she'd said something that made me laugh without expecting to. And I set the 17 words down inside myself and said something else instead. Can I tell you something? She turned to look at me. Yeah, I overheard you yesterday, in the break room. The way her face changed is something I will keep for a long time. The color came up in her cheeks. Her eyes went very still. She held the railing. What did you hear? Enough, I said. I heard the bet. She opened her mouth, closed it, started again. That wasn't... I mean, we were just... You're fine, I said. Really, I'm not here to make you feel bad about it. She looked at me carefully. Then why are you here? I reached into my jacket pocket and took out the reservation card. I had printed it, which perhaps tells you everything you need to know about me as a person. A small white card. Aldine, Thursday the 13th, table for 2, 7:30 p.m. I held it out to her. Because I made this reservation 3 weeks ago, I said, before I heard anything. And I'd like you to come to dinner with me tonight, if you want. She looked at the card. She looked at me. She looked back at the card. The city hummed beneath us. Someone 3 blocks away was playing music, something slow and barely audible. Nora Quinn was quiet for a long time. I held the railing and let the quiet be what it was. You made this 3 weeks ago. she said finally. I did. Why didn't you just ask me? And this is where I told her the truth. Not the smooth, rehearsed version, but the real one. Because I wanted to get it right. Because I've been watching you work for over a year, and I know that you pay attention to everything, and I didn't want to give you something careless. A pause. And honestly, because I was working up the nerve. Her expression shifted. Something in it became less guarded, less surprised, more something else I couldn't name yet, but that made the air on the terrace feel different. So the bet was right, she said quietly. In a way, you didn't ask for a long time. The bet was about whether I'd ever ask, I said. Not about whether I wanted to. She was quiet again. Her fingers brushed the edge of the card. Aldine is nice, she said. I know. How do you know? Have you been there? No. But I did research. She blinked. You researched the restaurant. I researched several restaurants, I said. I made a list. I had criteria. Nora Quinn looked at me for a full 5 seconds. And then she laughed. Not a polite laugh, not a soft one. A full, surprised, genuinely delighted laugh that she seemed almost embarrassed to be having. She pressed her free hand against her mouth and shook her head. Criteria, she said. You had criteria. Quiet enough to actually talk, I said. Good enough to be worth the occasion. Not so expensive it would seem like a statement, not so casual it would seem like an afterthought. She was still smiling when she asked, and what was the occasion? I looked at her. You, I said simply. The occasion was you. The smile faded just slightly, not into unhappiness but into something more careful. Something that was listening. I owe Marcus $20, she said softly. You don't have to tell him, I said. Believe me, she said, still looking at me. I don't mind paying. She took the card. We met at Aldine at 7:30. I arrived first, which I had planned to do. Not as a power move, not as anything strategic, just because I didn't want her to be the one standing at the door waiting. She came in out of the October cold, with her hair slightly wind-touched and her coat buttoned wrong, one button off all the way down. She didn't notice until she sat down, and I must have glanced at it because she looked down and laughed at herself and said, "Classic." And I thought, I will remember this for the rest of my life. We ordered wine. We talked. Not the way we talked at work, in increments and interruptions, but fully, completely, the way two people talk when they've given themselves permission to finally use the time. She told me about growing up in Portland, the youngest of 3, the one who was always watching the others to figure out how things worked. She told me she'd studied architecture before switching to design, and that she still sometimes caught herself measuring spaces when she walked into a room, calculating proportions without meaning to, like a reflex that never quite switched off. I told her about Chicago, about why I left, about the particular exhaustion of a city you've outgrown. She said, "Is Portland better?" And I said, without thinking, "It's gotten better." She understood what I meant. She didn't push it, and she didn't deflect. She just nodded once, slowly, the same way she did in meetings when something registered. We talked about the kind of things people talk about when they're paying real attention to each other for the first time. She had opinions about architecture that were precise and unexpected. She believed buildings should feel like the place they were in, that a building that could exist anywhere was a failure of imagination. She had a theory about why certain decades produced better music and could argue it in real time with specifics. She had a complicated relationship with the word fine, which she said most people used to end conversations rather than have them. I laughed at that longer than I expected to, because it was exactly true and because nobody had ever put it that way before. At some point, without either of us tracking the time, the restaurant had emptied around us. The waiter had come twice to offer dessert menus, and both times we'd waved him off without looking. We were in the middle of something. Nora was telling me about a project she'd almost quit over 2 years earlier. A design system that her manager had handed to someone else after she'd spent 8 months building it, the way it had made her feel small and invisible and furious all at once, and the way she'd decided to stay anyway because leaving felt like confirming something she refused to confirm about herself. She told it the way people tell things they've thought about a lot but don't say out loud often. Carefully, honestly. like she was trusting me with it. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Not to deflect the intimacy of it, but because I was genuinely curious. She looked at me. She considered the question seriously, the way she considered everything. "Because you made a reservation 3 weeks in advance and had a list of criteria," she said finally. "That tells me you're not going to make me feel stupid for meaning things." I held her gaze. The wine glass between us caught the candlelight. "I'm not," I said. "I know," she said. And then, because she was Nora Quinn and she noticed everything and said things directly when the moment called for it, I made that bet because I thought if I said it out loud it would stop mattering. Something shifted in the air between us. I kept very still. "Did it work?" She shook her head. "Just once. Barely." "Not even a little," she said. We walked out into the October air at almost 11 o'clock. The street was quiet, just the kind of quiet that a Thursday night finds eventually. Not empty, just slower. The edges smoothed down. We walked toward where I'd parked, which was in the same general direction as the bus stop she used, and neither of us hurried. The cold was the kind that makes you want to walk close to someone. We were close, not touching, just near. "The criteria list," she said at one point, not as a question, more like she was returning to it, savoring it. "I want to see it sometime." "It's on my laptop," I said. "Of course it is," she said. And she smiled at the sidewalk. We stopped at the corner where her bus stop was. The night was still. She turned to face me, and the streetlight caught her eyes in the way it did. Warm and very clear. "This was good," she said. "This was very good." "Yeah," I said. "It was." She tilted her head a little. "You were going to say 17 words." I stared at her. She smiled. "I could tell. You came up to that terrace and you had something ready. And then you changed your mind and said something true instead. How could you possibly know that?" "Because I was watching," she said. "I always watch." I let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "What were you going to say?" she asked. I thought about it. The rehearsed line, the careful words, the 17-word approach I'd spent 3 weeks refining. And I realized, standing at that corner in October, that it had been the right instinct to set them down. Because what I'd said instead was truer, and she had deserved the true version. "Something more formal," I said. "Something I'd practiced." "I like that you didn't," she said. "I like that you told me the truth instead." The bus was somewhere in the distance, its lights just visible around the corner. "Not here yet. Still a minute, maybe 2. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course." She paused, just long enough to mean it was something real. "Did you ever think about not going through with it? After you heard the bet?" I considered being dishonest. It would have been easy. But she was Nora Quinn, and she had just told me she could tell when I was about to say something I'd prepared, so I told her the truth. For about 7 seconds, I said, "In the hallway." I stood there and I felt it. All of it. She was listening. And then I thought, does this change what's actually true? And the answer was no. She was quiet. The bus lights were closer now. 7 seconds, she said softly. That's not very long. It was long enough to decide, I said. The bus pulled up. Its doors side open. Nora stepped toward it, then stopped and turned back. "For what it's worth," she said, "I put $20 on the wrong thing," and then she was on the bus, and the doors closed, and I stood on the sidewalk and watched it pull away into the Thursday night. I stood there for a while. The street was quiet. I didn't feel like moving yet. She texted at 11:47. One message. The button was off the whole dinner. I texted back. I noticed. Her response came immediately. "Why didn't you say anything?" I typed, "Because you looked exactly right to me." 3 dots appeared. Appeared again. Then, "Go to sleep." I did not go to sleep for another 2 hours. I lay in the dark and thought about everything the way you do when something you'd been quietly waiting for has finally become real and you don't quite know what to do with all the space it fills up. We had dinner again the following Thursday, and the one after that. And at some point I stopped thinking of them as dinners and started thinking of them as the part of my week that everything else organized itself around. Nora was different outside the office in ways that surprised me and ways that didn't. She was funnier than I expected, not just the dry, incisive funny she was in meetings, but silly, surprisingly willing to be absurd, to make a joke at her own expense just to see if it would land. She laughed at my jokes in a way that felt like she meant it, which is maybe the rarest thing in the world. She had a good memory for small things I'd said in passing and would reference them weeks later, which meant she had been paying attention even when I thought she wasn't, which meant she almost always was. She was also harder in some ways. There were evenings when she went quiet and I could feel the door closing, and I had learned by then to just sit with it, to not push it open before she was ready. There was a night in late November when she told me about a year she'd had at 26, the year everything had gone sideways at once, her last relationship ending badly, a health scare she didn't want to detail, her father's hospitalizations, and she told it in pieces, slowly, testing the ground between sentences. I didn't offer advice, I didn't try to resolve it, I just listened the way she'd always listened in meetings, actually there, not just waiting to respond. When she finished, she said, "Nobody just listens anymore." I said, "You do." She looked at me for a moment. "I do," she agreed quietly. Then, "So do you." It was a small thing. It was not a small thing. Marcus stopped by my desk one morning in early December. "I heard about Aldine," he said. I looked up. "She showed me the card," he said. "The reservation card," I said, puzzled. He nodded. "She kept it." Something happened in my chest when he said that. Something warm and quiet and enormous. "Anyway," Marcus said, leaning against the desk, "you played that one well." "I didn't play anything," I said. He thought about it for a moment. "No," he agreed. "I guess you didn't." He pushed off the desk. "She told me to tell you something, by the way." "What?" "She said she's glad she was wrong." He walked off. I sat at my desk and didn't move for several minutes. If you've ever been told that someone you love is glad they underestimated you, not as a victory, but as a gift, then you already know exactly what I felt in that moment. December. One evening after dinner, walking past the holiday market in the square, she reached over and took my hand. Just reached over and took it, without a word, like it was the most ordinary thing. It was the first time we'd done that. I felt it all the way through my chest. We kept walking, and neither of us commented on it, because it didn't need a comment. It just was. Some things are like that. The simplest ones usually. There's a thing she said to me in January, a few months into this, on a Sunday morning when we were at her kitchen table with coffee and the specific piece of a morning that has nowhere it needs to be. She said, "You know what the bet was really about?" I looked at her. "I was scared," she said, matter-of-factly, like it was already over and she could look at it clearly. "I'd been watching you for months too, and it was easier to make it a joke than to admit I was actually waiting for something." She said it so plainly that it caught me off guard. "You could have told me," I said. "I know," she said, "but I needed you to go first." I thought about that, about the strange symmetry of it. Both of us paying careful attention, both of us unsure. Her making a joke to cover the hoping. Me making a reservation to make the hoping real. "We were both waiting," I said. "I just had a slightly more elaborate approach." She laughed into her coffee. "The criteria list," she said, for approximately the 5th time. "I love that it exists. I thought you might find it excessive," I admitted. She shook her head. "I find it honest," she said. "That's what it is. You weren't performing, you were just being you, carefully and completely." She reached across the table and touched my hand briefly, the way she did sometimes, instead of saying the big thing. "I fell for that," she said simply. Not the gesture. The person behind it. I have thought about that sentence many times since she said it. I will probably think about it for the rest of my life. Here's what I know about Nora Quinn after all of this. She is the most attentive person I have ever met. She sees things before they become obvious. She carries other people's words with her longer than they realize. She keeps a small white reservation card in the front pocket of her blue notebook. She laughs loudest when she's been genuinely surprised. She goes quiet when something matters, and loud when something is funny. And the difference between those two states teaches you everything you need to know about what she values. She notices when you've been listening, and she notices when you haven't. She makes room for silence, and she fills it only when she has something real to say. She once spent 20 minutes explaining to me why certain buildings deserved better lighting, and I would have listened for 20 more. And she bet $20 once that I would never ask her out. I think about that sometimes. Not with bitterness, with something closer to gratitude, because that bet told me something I needed to know. It told me she had been thinking about it. It told me that the space between us, which I had been filling slowly and quietly with 14 months of small mornings and coffee orders and blue notebook observations, had not been invisible to her. It had been seen, it had been measured. It had been named in a break room on a Tuesday afternoon with a $20 figure and a laugh that wasn't quite as easy as it sounded. The plan worked. But not because it was clever. It worked because I understood, standing in that hallway for 7 seconds, that the truest thing is never the bet someone makes about you. The truest thing is what you do when no one is watching. The reservation I made before she had any reason to expect it. The words I chose in the end over the ones I'd practiced. The steps from my desk to the 5th-floor terrace on a Thursday afternoon while she stood at the railing and didn't yet know I was coming. Some love stories start with fireworks and perfect timing. Some start with a sentence overheard through a half-open door. This one started with a blue notebook in a bi-weekly meeting and a coffee order I memorized without meaning to. And it ended, or rather, it is still going, still every Thursday dinner, still that particular Sunday morning piece with coffee and nowhere to be, with a woman who bet everyone I didn't have the nerve, and a man who had already made the reservation. We were both right, we were both wrong. We found each other somewhere in the middle of that, in the space between her doubt and my quiet preparation, and I don't plan to leave. I don't plan to leave.